Hi, I'm Rachel Greenberg with Volta Insider, and we are here in Cleveland at the Rock and Roll Museum Hall of Fame. I'm here with Dr. Jason Hanley. What does the museum teach?
I'm the director of education here, which is an awesome job to have because it allows me to teach people of all ages every day. We get folks from toddlers, little kids who come here, through high school, college, and adults, and we get to teach about the significance and the history of rock and roll. But the great thing is that the story of rock and roll so much ties into the story of American history, of what's happened over the last 60 years since rock and roll started, how rock and roll has gone out around the world and affected so many people and changed so many things in the lives of people who listen to it, who enjoy it, who make the music. And all of that is tied together in what we represent here. So rock and roll is always at the core of what we do, but it allows us to talk about an awful lot of things connected to the history of the music.
How would you justify the importance of the programs here to someone who doesn't necessarily appreciate music or its importance in society?
Well, first of all, I would try and convince them that music is important and that it is important in society, because I think a big thing about rock and roll in particular is it really is sort of a voice of the people who are making it, the people who are the fans of it. You're getting to hear in each era of rock and roll, each style, different people's opinions, different stories that are being told through the lyrics, different sounds that are being made through the music. So I think it's important for people to recognize why that music has such an impact on people around the world, right? And it's an American art form. Rock and roll started in the United States of America and went out from there. So I think, a museum like this is important because it's a history museum really at its core, right? Mm-hmm. So the music is important, and again, being a musician myself, I want people to like it and convince them. But even if they don't enjoy the music or there's a particular style they don't like, I'd encourage people to kind of look behind that and see ways that you could see how the music connects with the people who do enjoy it, or the people who are making it and why they're making music that sounds that way. It's a fascinating story that always is having new parts to it. We're always moving forward in the history of music. So,
wow. What kinds of programs and tools do you use to show those messages?
Mm-hmm. So we try and do a little bit of everything, right? Because the best thing is when you're talking to different audiences, particularly in the case, like I said, here at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, we're always having different people of different ages, coming from different places all around the United States, all around the world. People come to visit here. So we have live programming that we do in our theater where we actually teach about the history of the music. In fact, we just had one earlier today. And those programs will contain us talking about it, but we'll be showing some video of classic performances. We might even be performing ourselves to demonstrate particular ideas. We also teach through our website. We have a really great digital classroom program where people can go online and learn a lot about the history of the music and see different video clips that we have there, both of ourselves, but some oral histories we've done with some of the inductees or other artists who've come through the museum. And we teach through all other ways too. We have a lot of resources that are available through the museum. We have exhibit guides. We have the exhibits themselves, so that's why I think it's so important for people to come to Cleveland and enjoy the museum, because just walking through here, you're going to get such a sense of that history and the power of the music through the building.
Since rock and roll is obviously very music-oriented, how do you transfer that to such a visual thing as a museum, as opposed to just saying, okay, here's a bunch of play buttons?
That's a great question, right? Because one of the things you want to do in a place like this is to get the vibrancy, the energy of the music out there somehow. And you're right, it can be a little bit hard, right? There's one element where you're going to hang something on the wall, a guitar or a costume. Now, some of those items speak for themselves, right? If you've got a guitar that Jimi Hendrix played, a lot of people are going to be emotionally connected to that. So seeing that artifact, that object, is going to do it. But if you walk through the exhibits, you'll notice there's an awful lot of things that support the artifacts as well. There's music playing that tries to give you a sense of different sounds of rock and roll, from soul to heavy metal to punk to funk, whatever it might be, new wave music, right? There's also a lot of context around it. We try and tell that story and tie the musicians into what was happening. For example, this year, we had Ringo Starr was inducted as a solo artist, but we have a huge kind of Beatles exhibit here too. And the Beatles are so important when you think about how they first came to America and played on the Ed Sullivan Show, and the song I Want to Hold Your Hand became such a big hit back in 1964. Well, that's the same time, just a few months after JFK was assassinated. So suddenly you can tie the story of the Beatles and their coming and being a huge artist and how that played in America at the time for what was going on in history. And the exhibits represent that. They show a lot about the time period and what's going on. And we also have a lot of great films that you can sit and watch. I always tell people, if you came to the museum and just watched the films here, I think it'd take you probably about 5 hours just to see the movies alone. And there you're getting to see the performances and the context as well.
You guys seem to be doing a pretty good job of that.
Yeah.
What do most people want to see at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? What's your biggest attraction?
So I think probably the thing that a lot of people want to see, particularly, are some of those key artifacts. Something like Ringo Starr's drum set that we have out there right now. That's such an iconic thing. It's a big drum set that Ringo played during his most formative years with the Beatles. They want to see something like that. They want to see Jimi Hendrix guitar or Elvis. Elvis is a big draw. A lot of people still look back to him as the king of rock and roll, right?
Yes,
and they want to see a lot of his personal items, because it's not just everything he performed with. Sometimes we have things like, a book he owned, or, some papers that he had, or letters he wrote. And it's those personal touches that draw people in. I think also one thing that a lot of people really connect with are handwritten lyrics. So you'll see a lyric maybe that, let's say, Janis Joplin's writing a song out, and she's just sketching it on maybe a piece of hotel stationery back in the day, right? Because she was traveling a lot. Yeah. And she'll write out the lyrics, but then she might cross something out and put a new word in there. And for a lot of visitors, that's a glimpse into the creative process. They can see a little bit about what Janis was thinking when she was writing down those words, or what Bob Marley was thinking when he was writing out words. And it lets you sort of almost get into the moment of creation. You can sort of see, oh, that word they changed, that was a good choice. The original one is not as good as what they scratched out and changed it to. So those tend to be very, very popular here in the museum too.
So would you say the elements of intimacy and relatability is what makes this museum so special? Absolutely.
And I think, the really fascinating thing, Rachel, is that it's this music, rock and roll, is music that people grew up with, that continues to be popular. So not only are they listening to it, looking at the artist who made it, but it's connecting to their story, their own history. So I might go out there on the exhibit floor and take a look at an artist that I loved growing up, right? And suddenly now it brings me back to a point in my life, and I can kind of remember where I was. And then if I feel, by looking at those artifacts and maybe the display that's there, the text, some of the photographs, a movie about it, it's a way to connect me up to it, right? And I bring my own memories to it. So every person that comes through here is going to have a little bit of a different experience than everybody else, because they bring their own story to the museum as well.
Speaking of connection, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame will be hosting some members from the Republican National Committee today. What role does music play in politics, if any?
Yeah, it plays a big role in politics, actually. And I think part of that is some of the things we've already talked about a little bit. Rock and roll is a popular music, right? It's music that is made by people who are living and experiencing things in the time that they're from, right? And rock and roll musicians want to talk about the world around them. And politics is a big part of that, right? What's happening, we'll just take the United States, for example. What's happening in the country at any one point in time? If there's political debates going on about particular issues, those are issues that are important to people, right? Those are issues that affect their lives, that are going to say something about what they believe in. There's always a lot of discussion around political debates, like, what do Americans think? Well, Americans think a lot of different things, right? There's a lot of different stories in different parts of the country, right? And the cool thing about musicians and rock stars is they do have a voice. They have a microphone that lets them speak to potentially millions of people. Now, you may not always agree with everything a musician says, but the great thing, the power of that, is that they can give voice to different opinions. And it can spur a debate over a song even. People might try and think, hey, this musician's saying something about the political landscape or the landscape of what's happening in the world or the United States. How do we feel about that?
I mean, most of the music you hear on the radio is like, ooh, I'm in love in the club.
Right.
How do you think music is going to have an effect on this particular election?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think particularly as we move forward, you'll see the closer you get to the actual election that you're going to get a lot of musicians are going to start coming out and talking about what they're interested in, right? And who was it? Donald Trump wanted to use the Neil Young song just even recently in one of the recent kind of presentations he did. Mm-hmm. And Neil Young was not in support of that, right? Because his political view is very different from that of what Donald Trump was putting out. So there was an example where you even had a song that wasn't a political song, but the move and the change for somebody to want to use it in a political way, right?
Right.
And I think you get a lot of musicians are going to come out and maybe start in their performances, even their live performances, talking about what's happening. They're going to be, you even take something like what started back in the late 80s and 90s, Rock the Vote, right? Where a lot of rock musicians wanted young people to come out and start voting, like voice your opinion, be part of it. And it's a long history. I mean, it goes back to, we can think of some of the highlights. Bob Dylan, right, who was always trying to talk about what was happening in society, particularly in his songs in the early 60s. Mm-hmm. And then up through the Vietnam War era, where a lot of musicians came out and talked about what was happening. Even during the Iraq War in recent memory, a lot of musicians were coming out and making albums and records about what was happening at the time. And those are ones connected maybe to conflict, which of course generate a lot of emotion and people feel very strongly about it. But you'll see a lot of musicians are going to come out and thinking about political and those love songs you mentioned are important too, right? Because in the end of the day, no matter what, we all fall in love, we all fall out of love. Those are songs that connect us as people too, right? And those songs may not have a big political message, but they sure connect to us emotionally.
You've taught courses on popular music and music technology. In what ways do you think music is evolving in terms of production and just the way it generally sounds?
I, as a scholar of music, am always excited and thrilled to hear and see what's going to happen next. And sometimes it goes in ways you could predict, and you think, all right, here's a trend that's developing. I'm hearing producers or DJs are doing this certain type of thing, or singers are starting to do this type of thing, and you can kind of get a gauge of where things are going. The best thing is when something comes out of left field. Mm-hmm. And somebody innovates, they do something brand new you didn't expect. They change it up. They mix something from the past together in a way that you wouldn't have seen. And rock and roll is a style of music that is innovative. People are always trying to push for something new and something different. They don't want to sound exactly like the band that came before them. And there might be trends, but people want to change it up all the time.
What do you think of sites like SoundCloud where just people that just say, hey, I have GarageBand.
Yeah.
Let's make an album.
It's an exciting time, right? I mean, that we always should think that people have always made music in their living room, backyard, wherever, right? You could go back 100 years and somebody's just picking an acoustic guitar up and playing a song. Go back 200 years, people are singing songs just, by themselves with their voices, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So music is a cultural phenomenon. It's something that we share, that we do together, that we create. And I think the technology might be changing. And now instead of somebody picking up a guitar, they're picking up their iPhone or they're picking up an iPad. But the creativity is what's important, right? It's exciting to see people always coming up with something fun and new and different. And sites like SoundCloud, I mean, the great thing is you and I right now, we can decide we're going to start a band and the two of us sit down and we do something together and immediately we can share it. That's a type of access maybe that people didn't have really ever in the history of humanity, right? I mean, people could do something, we could share it with people we knew, but now we can post it on the internet and try and get that to go out to people potentially all around the world. It's a pretty amazing time, exciting time, but it can also be daunting, right? Because you're in there with a pool of a million other people who are also in their bedrooms making music and posting it online. So
on the other side of the scale, what is the induction process like for the Hall of Fame? Like, what qualification does a musician or a band have to meet in order to be inducted?
Yeah, great. So we are a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? So that means what we're doing is honoring the best, right? Mm-hmm. People who show musical excellence, that they've really, mastered their instrument in some way. And that doesn't mean just virtuosity, that I can play a million notes on a guitar super fast, but maybe what I play is, really something that takes a lot of skill or brings a lot of emotion to the performance. We're looking for people who have had influence on others, right? Have they actually gone and created a style where we're talking about creativity? Have they created something new that others followed along with? Did they have an impact on society? And this brings us back to the political landscape, right? Did somebody write a song that changed people's minds, that got people to think about a topic or an idea in a way that was different than what they had before? And then there's the one kind of hard and fast actual rule, is that you have to have had an album out for 25 years before you can be inducted.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? I mean, there's a good reason for it. It's so that, not to throw anybody under the bus, but it's so that we don't all of a sudden induct Justin Bieber right away. We got to wait and see, all right, 25 years from now, are we still going to look back and say that person was great? Because there are many good artists and there are many people we enjoy, but we want to induct people who stand the test of time.
Okay.
Right? 25 years from now, we're going to still be having an impact, still being important. And maybe they're not performing 25 years from now, but we can look back and say, this person in that certain period of time was important. They did something that was valuable.
We do the same thing in school.
Yep.
I had to do an English paper, and it had to meet about a book, say a great work, and it had to meet all of that criteria, especially standing the test of time.
Well, I'll tell you, since you brought that up too, we actually, you were asking about some of our programs. Yeah. We have a program on our website called Voice Your Choice. And it's actually a program that's made for high school students to go and use the criteria we give for the Hall of Fame inductions, provides a lot of materials, and then you have to pick an artist that you want to induct into the Rock Hall.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about rap music, especially in relation to rock and roll? Because rap is so popular now, and rock and roll is obviously very different stylistically. Yeah,
one really interesting thing there is what the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame considers to be rock and roll. And for us, it's a really broad category. Essentially, we start with the period in the 1940s and 1950s when this music first came out of a lot of other American musics. It was sort of a mix of country and R&B and blues and gospel, and all this stuff kind of went into a melting pot and turned into rock and roll. But we look at anything that's come out since then, right? So in fact, hip hop is part of what we honor here at the museum.
And we've had,
we've had a number of hip hop inductees since the early days. We now have Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, Public Enemy, the Beastie Boys, Run DMC.
I did not know that. That's so cool. So you are a doctor of music and you conduct the oral history sessions. What is it like to sit with those rock legends? What are their reactions? How do they feel about it?
It's pretty awesome. I'll tell you, myself getting up there on stage, even though I've studied music history for a long time and I always prepare a lot in order to get on stage and talk to an inductee or another great rock legend, you always have to suppress a little bit of your fandom, right? Because I'm usually, it's a little bit nerve-wracking. I think you're going to get up there on stage with, someone who's an inductee and talk to them about their life and career. And they often are very nervous and excited too, because they're here at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, right? Yeah. They want to tell their story. They're excited to tell their story. And I think the great thing that what we do here at the Rock Hall is we don't want to just know the headlines, right? We don't want to just know, what's your new album? What do you think of it? Like, we're trying to ask them about their life and their career. And it's amazing to see, once they get comfortable, once you can make a musician like that comfortable and bring them in to really tell the story, they open up a lot. And they'll tell you a lot about their kind of personal life or their creative story about how they got something to happen. And sometimes it's something difficult for them to talk about. We had a number of years ago Peter Hook, who was the bass player for the band Joy Division and New Order. Okay. And great musician, still an incredible musician out there playing and performing. But one of the things about the band Joy Division is their lead singer died. And they had to make the decision if they were going to continue on afterwards. And eventually they did, becoming the band New Order. So that was a really emotional moment for him, right?
Yeah.
Remembering back to a good friend of his. That's something that's a legend in rock history, so he gets asked about it. But the way we tried to talk to him here was really to get him to tell a story from his point of view on a personal level. And it's a very emotional story, right?
Right.
Or, we've had a situation, I talked to some of the members of the OJs, who are a band out of this part of Ohio, actually, from Canton originally, known for their work on Philadelphia International record label in Philly. But I was talking to them a little bit on stage, their inductees, about performing and performing all over the place. And particularly at a time where soul music was becoming popular, but it was just after the Civil Rights Act, so the United States was, still in a place where segregation had its hold in many areas.
Okay, yeah.
And they talked about having to perform concerts knowing that there were the Ku Klux Klan out in the audience. And what would that be like? How could you continue to perform knowing that somebody was out there and there was this kind of, real negative energy in the place? And that sometimes they feared for their lives, right? Performing and going around. So, yeah, I mean, for me, it's one of the most rewarding things is that I've studied this history all these years, and now I get to sit down with these musicians and hear them tell these important parts of the history. And I always say, if I come out of one of those and I haven't learned something new myself, then I'm not doing my job right. So I need to learn something new every time, too.
What was your personal history with performing and producing music?
Oh boy, that's a long story. We'll make it short.
The abridged version.
The short version. So I've always loved music, and my family always loved music. My dad used to be a singer and used to sing in a doo-wop group back in New York in the 60s.
Wow.
So he always loved listening to doo-wop music and played music in the radio, sang along, had us do it. My brother and I took music lessons from a fairly early age. But for me, it didn't really all kind of click together until I was in college. Mm-hmm. And I actually took a course in electronic music, which was something I was always fascinated by. And this is in the early days. This isn't iPhones and that.
No
This is
EDM?
yeah, exactly. This is pre all of that. And I just said, man, that's something that's really fascinating to me. So I decided I wanted to do my undergraduate degree in music. I had always kind of played in bands as a hobby and things like that. My parents had taken me to see Elvis and Johnny Cash, so I had a good kind of, grounding in the basics. But then when I got into doing music, I just realized how much I loved it. And particularly, even more than performing, I loved the history. The story of the music, and it's not just rock and roll, classical music and world music and all that I studied in my degree as well. And eventually, as I went on to get a PhD, a doctorate. Although my PhD dissertation was on a style of rock and roll called industrial music.
What is that?
So it's a mixture of kind of avant-garde experimental noise music and rock and roll. And it started in places like Germany and England back in the 1970s, bands like Throbbing Gristle and Einstürzende Neubauten. But eventually it came over to the United States.
Sorry.
See, we'll have to play some before you leave. I'll educate you a little. But you might know some of the more popular practitioners these days, Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson. All those bands are from that lineage, and that's what I actually did all my research on. But over the years, as you asked, I've been a performer myself in many bands. I continue to play now, perform in a band. I've produced records in the past. I always liked having a kind of eclectic interest in music. So doing a little bit of everything, not just studying the history, but performing also, producing, working with musicians. And again, that's, I'm lucky enough that I get to do that as my profession every day.
Yeah. What advice would you have for somebody considering going into the music industry?
I think an important thing, if somebody wants to get into the music industry, something they should think about right away is the fact that the music industry is gigantic. And being the star is only one tiny little slice of that. That there's so many other interesting jobs and professions inside of the music industry, from managers and booking agents to producers, sound engineers, people who work on the road crew, who do design, fashion design, photography, journalism. There's a whole world of stuff out there. And I also think if you're younger and looking to get into that today, you're a lot luckier maybe than I would have been, because there weren't a lot of school programs and things you could go into on how to be in the music industry. But now there are. There's a lot of great colleges and universities and even high schools that have programs on how to get into the music industry, how to learn about the technology, about the business, about the music itself. And I would also say to take it seriously. There's every one of us who is a rock musician has had a moment where we had the rock dream, right? That, I'm going to leave this little town and climb the great hill and be a rock star, and I'm just going to do it because I'm awesome. But in fact, it turns out it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of smarts, right? Mm-hmm. So study up, pay attention, have fun, play gigs, in little clubs and enjoy yourself, but pay attention, try and learn something from everybody you work with. There's a lot to be said for apprenticeship in that sense too, right? If you're going to play music live or produce or get a chance to even work a soundboard, watch the person who's next to you and see what they're doing too.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
All right, here we go. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, snooping round the door. You ain't nothing but a hound dog, snooping round the door. Well, you ain't never caught a rabbit, and you don't want to come round here no more. There you go, a little call and response for you, Rachel.